Right. Hello, folks. It's me, SkitterSkreth. They're at down here in this cursed library. I feel the need to reiterate this every time because no one has seen any of this yet, as far as I'm aware, and so no one will know what's going on if I don't. But then no one shows up. That's not true. There was that one guy who showed up to try and sell me something. So I guess if that guy comes back, you know what's going on. Everyone else, right? So quick brief. I'm a rat. I'm trapped in a cursed library of some sort. Not the room you're looking at now. This room is a little. Well, I guess it's in the curse. It's a side room in a cursed library. I built these shelves at the behest of my friend Lamp. You can see over there in the top right. And once I was done with that, Lamp had me go find good books amongst the many books that are bad and damaged and screamy, and bring them back here. And I found 4 so far, and I've been reading them because Lamp wants me to. I'm unclear on why. And so far we've read 3 of them, and we're partway through the 4th one, which is White Fang by Jack London. So I guess if you haven't seen that one, which as far as I'm aware no one has, you won't really understand this one. So maybe I should give like a little summary of it. Lamp, what do you think? Right. Okay, yeah, I can do that, I think. So it has been 3 days, no Lamp. We've established I have no way to tell how time passes down here, so no matter how long it's actually been, which you insist you know, it's been 3 days, because I've decided so. So it has been 3 days since I read the last thing. I don't know what time is showing out there or what time it's actually been because I don't have a way of tracking time in this cursed library. But yeah, it hasn't been 3 days. It's still fairly fresh in my mind, so I'll give a little account of what happened in the last section of the book and what's happened so far, and then I can, I guess I can from there start reading the new section, and it won't be bad. I have just realised I didn't get any water, which is bad because my throat gets dry during these. So just a second, grab my water. There we are. Very important to have water. It's the only thing I can get consistently down here, other than the cheese Lamp gives me for reading these. So, right. So where was we? Yes, oh yeah, so I'm giving a little summary. So the first part of this book, which was called The Wild, told the story of 2 fellows, whose names, one of them was Emery and one of them was Bill, I think, who were travelling along somewhere in a cold place, I think the Yukon. They were travelling along a trail somewhere in the cold, transporting a body with a team of dogs and being pursued by wolves. And over the course of a few days, there was a wolf in amongst the other wolves who was part dog, and who would come in a camp and get food with the rest of their dogs, and would lure their dogs out to be eaten by the wolves. And after a few of them was led away, Bill tried to go and shoot them once in the middle of the day, and then the wolves got bolder and bolder and became less and less scared of the fire until Emery was struggling to stay awake to keep them away and keep the fire built. Eventually he built a circle of fire around himself after they ate the last of the dogs, and then just as it was dying out, some other men came looking for, I think, the guy who was in the box. I don't think they knew he was dead, and Emery was saved. And that's where the story ended last. So, let's see, where are we now? Here we are, okay. So, resuming White Fang here with part 2, Born of the Wild. Chapter 1, The Battle of the Fangs. It was the she-wolf who had first caught the sound of men's voices and the whine of the sled dogs, and it was the she-wolf who was first to spring away from the cornered man in a circle of dying flame. The pack had been loath to forego the killer it had hunted down, and it lingered for several minutes, making sure of the sound, and then it too sprang away on a trail made by the she-wolf. Running at the forefront of the pack was a large grey wolf, one of its several leaders. It was he who directed the pack's course on the heels of the she-wolf. It was he who snarled warningly at the younger members of the pack or slashed at them with his fangs when they ambitiously tried to pass him. And it was he who increased the pace when he sighted the she-wolf, now trotting slowly across the snow. She dropped in alongside by him, as though it were her appointed position, and took the pace of the pack. He did not snarl at her, nor show his teeth, when any leaper has chanced to put her in advance of him. On the contrary, he seemed kindly disposed towards her, too kindly to suit her, for he was prone to run near her, and when he ran too near, it was she who snarled and showed her teeth. Nor was she above slashing his shoulder sharply on occasion. At such times he betrayed no anger. He merely sprang to the side and ran stiffly ahead for several awkward leaps, in carriage and conduct resembling an abashed country swain. This was one trouble in the running of the pack, but she had other troubles. On her other side ran a gaunt old wolf, grizzled and marked with the scars of many battles. He ran always on her right side. In fact, he had but one eye, and that left eye might account for this. He also was addicted to crowding her, to veering towards her till his scarred muzzle touched her body or shoulder or neck. As with the run met on the left, she repelled these attentions with her teeth, but when both bestowed their attentions at the same time, she was roughly jostled, being compelled with quick snaps to either side to drive both lovers away, and at the same time to maintain her forward leap with the pack and see the way of her feet before her. At such times, her running mates flashed their teeth and growled threateningly across at each other. They might have fought, but even woman and its rivalry waited upon the more pressing hunger need of the pack. After each repulse, when the old wolf sheered abruptly away from the sharp-toothed object of his desire, he shouldered against the young 3-year-old that ran on his blind right side. This young wolf had attained its full size, and considering the weak and famished condition of the pack, he possessed more than the average vigour and spirit. Nevertheless, he ran with his head even with the shoulder of his one-eyed elder. When he ventured to run abreast of the older wolf, which was seldom, a snarl and snap sent him back, even with the shoulder again. Sometimes, however, he dropped cautiously and slowly behind and edged in between the old leader and the she-wolf. This was doubly resented, even triply resented. When she snarled at displeasure, the old leader would whirl on the 3-year-old. Sometimes she whirled with him, and sometimes the young leader on the left whirled too. At such times, confronted by 3 sets of savage teeth, the young wolf stopped precipitously, throwing himself back on his haunches, with forelegs stiff, mouth menacing, and mane bristling. His confusion in the front of the moving pack always caused confusion in the rear. The wolves behind collided with the young wolf and expressed their displeasure by administering sharp nips on his iron legs and flanks. He was laying up trouble for himself, for lack of food and short tempers went together. But with the boundless faith of youth, he persisted in repeating the manoeuvre every little while, though it never succeeded in gaining anything for him but discomfiture. Had there been food, the love-making and fighting would have gone on apace, and the pack formation would have been broken up. But the situation of the pack was desperate. It was lean with a long-standing hunger. It ran below its ordinary speed. At the rear limped the weak members, the very young and the very old. At the front were the strongest, yet all were more like skeletons than full-bodied wolves. Nevertheless, with the exception of the ones that limped, the movements of the animals were effortless and tireless. Their stringy muscles seemed fonts of inexhaustible energy. Behind every steel-like contraction of a muscle lay another steel-like contraction, and another, apparently without end. They ran many miles that day. They ran through the night, and the next day found them still running. They were running over the surface of a world frozen and dead. No life stirred. They alone moved through the vast inertness. They alone were alive, and they sought for other things that were alive in order that they might devour them and continue to live. They crossed low divides and ranged a dozen small streams in a lower-lying country before their quest was rewarded. Then they came upon a moose. It were a big bull they first found. Here was meat and life, and it was guarded by no mysterious fires, no flying missiles of flame. Splay hooves and palmated antlers they knew, and they flung their customary patience and caution to the wind. It were a brief fight and fierce. The big bull was beset on every side. He ripped them open or split their skulls with shrewdly driven blows of his great hooves. He crushed them and broke them on his large horns. He stamped them in the snow and under him in the wallowing struggle. But he was foredoomed, and he went down with the she-wolf tearing savagely at his throat, with other teeth fixed everywhere upon him, devouring him alive, before ever his last struggle ceased or his last damage had been wrought. There was food in plenty. The bull weighed over 800 pounds, fully 20 pounds of meat per mouth for each of the 40-odd wolves of the pack. If they could fast prodigiously, they could feed prodigiously, and soon a few scattered bones were all that remained of the splendid live brute that had faced the pack a few hours before. There was now much resting and sleeping. With full stomachs, bickering and quarrelling began among the younger males, and this continued through the through the few days that followed before the breaking up of the pack. The famine went over. The wolves were now in the country again, and though they still hunted in pack, they hunted more cautiously, cutting out heavy cows or crippled old bulls from the small moose herds they ran across. There came a day in this land of plenty where the wolf pack split in half and went in different directions. The she-wolf, the young leader on her left and the one-eyed elder on her right, led their half of the pack down the Mackenzie River and across into the lake country to the east. Each day this remnant of the pack dwindled. 2 by 2, male and female, the wolves were deserting. Occasionally a solitary male was driven out by the sharp teeth as his rival. In the end there remained only 4. The she-wolf, the young leader, the one-eyed wolf, and the ambitious 3-year-old. The she-wolf had by now developed a ferocious temper. Her 3 suitors all bore marks of her teeth, yet they never replied in kind, never defended themselves against her. They turned their shoulders to her most savage slashes, and with wagging tails and mincing steps strove to placate her wrath. But they were all mildness towards her. But if they were all mildness towards her, they were all too fierceness. Struggling with that one. But if they were all mildness towards her, they were all fierceness towards one another. The 3-year-old grew too ambitious in his fierceness. He caught the one-eyed elder on his blind side and ripped out his ear into ribbons. Though the grizzled old fellow could see only on one side, against the youth and vigour of the other, he brought into play wisdom of long year and experience. His lost eye and his scarred muzzle bore evidence to the nature of his experience. He had survived too many battles to be in doubt for a moment about what to do. The battle began fairly, but it did not end fairly. There was no telling what the outcome would have been, for the third wolf joined the elder, and together, old leader and young leader, they attacked the ambitious 3-year-old and proceeded to destroy him. He was beset on either side by the merciless fangs of his erstwhile comrades. Forgotten were the days they had hunted together, the game they had pulled down, the famine they had suffered. That business was a thing of the past. The business of love were at hand, ere a sterner and crueler business than that of food getting. And in the meanwhile, the she-wolf, the cause of it all, sat down contentedly on her haunches and watched. She was even pleased. This were her day, and it came not too often, when manes bristled and fangs smote for fang or ripped and tore at yielding flesh, all for the possession of her. And in the business of love, the 3-year-old, who had made his first adventure upon it, yielded up his life. On either side of his body stood his 2 rivals. They were gazing at the she-wolf, who sat smilingly in the snow. But the elder leader was wise, very wise, even in love even as in battle. The younger leader turned his head to lick a wound on his shoulder. The curve of his neck was turned towards his rival. With his one eye, the elder saw the opportunity. He darted in low and closed with his fangs. It were a long, ripping slash, and deep as well. His teeth, in passing, burst the wall of the great vein of the throat, and he leapt clear. The young leader snarled terribly, but his snarl broke midmost into a tickling cough. Bleeding and coughing, already stricken, he sprang at the elder, and fought him while life faded from him, his legs going weak beneath him, the light of day dull on his eyes, his blows and springs faltering shorter and shorter. All the while the she-wolf sat on her haunches and smiled. She was glad in vague ways with the battle, for this was the love-making of the wild, the sex tragedy of the natural world that was tragedy only to those that died. To those who survived, it was not tragedy, but realization and achievement. When the young leader lay in the snow and moved no more, One Eye stalked over to the she-wolf. His carriage was one of mingled triumph and caution. He was plainly expectant of a rebuff, and he was just as plainly surprised when her teeth did not flash out at him in anger. The first time she met him in a kindly manner. She sniffed noses with him, and even condescended to leap about and frisk, play with him in quite puppyish fashion. And he, for all his grey years and sage experience, behaved quite as puppyishly, and even a little more foolishly. Forgotten already were the vanquished rivals and the love tale written on the snow. Forgotten, save once when old One Eye stepped for a moment to lick his stiffening wounds. Then it was that his lip half writhed into a smile, and the hair of his neck and shoulders involuntarily bristled, while he half crouched for a spring, his claws spasmodically clutching into the snow surface for firmer footing. But it were all forgotten the next moment, as he sprung after the she-wolf, who was coyly leading him a chase through the woods. After that, they ran side by side, like good friends who had come to an understanding. The days passed, and they kept together, hunting their meat and killing and eating it in common. After a time, the she-wolf began to grow restless. She seemed to be searching for something she could not find. The hollows under fallen trees seemed to attract her, and she spent much time nosing about among the larger snow-piled crevices in the rocks and in the caves of overhanging banks. Old One Eye was not interested at all, but he followed her good-naturedly in her quest, and when her investigation in particular places were unusually protracted, he would lie down and wait until she were ready to go. They did not remain in one place, but travelled across country until they regained the Mackenzie River, down which they slowly went, leaving it often the one game along the small streams that entered it, but always returned to it again. Sometimes they chanced upon other wolves, usually in pairs, but there was no friendliness or intercourse displayed on either side, no gladness at meeting, no desire to return to the pack formation. Several times they encountered solitary wolves. These were always males, and they were pressingly insistent upon joining with One Eye and his mate. This he resented, and when she stood shoulder to shoulder with him, bristling and showing her teeth, the aspiring solitary ones would back off, turn tail, and continue on their lonely way. One moonlit night, running through the quiet forest, One Eye suddenly altered. His muzzle went up, his tail stiffened, and his nostril dilated as he scented the air. One foot also he held up, after the manner of a dog. He was not satisfied, and he continued to smell the air, striving to understand the message borne upon it to him. One careless sniff had satisfied his mate, and she trotted on to reassure him. Though he followed her, he was still dubious, and he could not forbear an occasional halt in order to more carefully study the warning. She crept out cautiously on the edge of a large open space in the midst of the trees. For some time she stood alone. Then One Eye, creeping and crawling, every sense on the alert, every hair radiating infinite suspicion, joined her. They stood side by side, watching and listening and smelling. To their ears came the sounds of dogs, wrangling and scuffling, the guttural cries of men, and the sharper voices of scolding women, and once the shrill and plaintive cry of a child. With the exception of the huge bulks of the skin lodges, where little could be seen save the flames of the fire, broken by the movements of intervening bodies, and the smoke rising slowly on the quiet air. But their nostrils came the myriad smells of an Indian camp, carrying a story that was largely incomprehensible to One Eye, but every detail of which the she-wolf knew. She was strangely stirred, and sniffed with an increasing delight, but old One Eye was doubtful. He betrayed his apprehension and started attentively to go. She turned and touched his neck with her muzzle in a reassuring way, then regarded the camp again. A new wistfulness was in her face, but it was not the wistfulness of hunger. She was thrilled into a desire that urged her to go forward, to be in closer to that fire, to be squabbling with the dogs, and to be avoiding and dodging the stumbling feet of men. One Eye moved impatiently beside her. Her unrest came back upon her, and she knew again her pressing need to find the things for which she searched. She turned and trotted back in the forest, to the great relief of One Eye, who trotted a little to the fore until they were well within the shelter of the trees. As they slid along, noiseless as shadows in the moonlight, they came upon a runway. Both noses went down to the footprints in the snow. These footprints was very fresh. One Eye ran ahead cautiously, his mate at his heels. The broad pads of their feet were spread wide and in contact with the snow were like velvet. One Eye caught sight of a dim movement of white in the midst of the white. His sliding gait had been deceptively swift, but it was as nothing to the speed at which she now ran. Before him was bound the faint patch of white he had discovered. They were running along a narrow alley flanked on either side by a growth of young spruce. Through the trees the mouth of the alley could be seen, opening out on a moonlit glade. Old One Eye was rapidly overhauling the fleeing shape of white. Bound by bound he gained. Now he was upon it. One leap more and his teeth would be sinking into it. But that leap was now made. High in the air and straight up soared the shape of white, now a struggling snowshoe rabbit that leaped and bounded, executing a fantastic dance there above him, in the air and never once returning to the earth. One Eye sprang back with a snort of sudden fright, and shrank down in the snow and crouched, snarling threats at this thing of fear he did not understand. But the she-wolf coolly thrust past him. She poised for a moment, and sprang for the dancing rabbit. She too saw eye, but not so high as the quarry, and her teeth clicked emptily together with a metallic snap. She made another leap, and another. Her mate had slowly relaxed from his crouch and was watching her. He now evinced displeasure at her repeated failures, and himself made a mighty spring upwards. His teeth closed upon the rabbit, and he bore it back to earth with him. But at the same time there was a suspicious crackling movement beside him, and his astonished eyes saw a young spruce sapling bending down about above him to strike him. His jaws let go of their grip, and he leaped backwards to escape this strange danger, his lips drawn back from his fangs, his throat snarling, every hair bristling with rage and fright. And in that moment the sapling reared its slender length upright, and the rabbit soared, dancing in the air again. The she-wolf were angry. She sank her fangs into her mate's shoulder in reproof, and he, frightened, unaware what constituted this new onslaught, struck back ferociously and in still greater fright, ripping down the side of the she-wolf's muzzle. For him to resent such a reproof was equally unexpected to her, and she sprang upon him in snarling indignation. Then he discovered his mistake and tried to placate her, but she proceeded to punish him roundly until he gave over all attempts at placation and whirled in a circle, his head away from her, his shoulders receiving the punishment of her teeth. In the meantime the rabbit danced above them in the air. The she-wolf sat down in the snow, and old One Eye, now more in fear of his mate than of the mysterious sapling, again sprang for the rabbit. As he sank back with it between his teeth, he kept his eye on the sapling. As before, it followed him back to earth. He crouched down under the impending blow, his air bristling, but his teeth still keeping tight hold of the rabbit. But the blow did not fall. The sapling remained bent above him. When he moved, it moved, and he growled at it through his clenched jaws. When he remained still, it remained still, and he concluded it was safer to continue remaining still. Yet the warm blood of the rabbit tasted good in his mouth. It were his mate who relieved him from the quandary in which he found himself. She took the rabbit from him, and while the sapling swayed and teetered threateningly above her, she calmly gnawed off the rabbit's head. At once the sapling shot up, and after that gave no more trouble, remaining in the decorous and perpendicular position in which nature had intended for it to grow. Then, between them, a she-wolf and One Eye devoured the game which the mysterious sapling had caught for them. There were other one-ways and alleys where rabbits were hanging in the air, and the wolf pair prospected them all, the she-wolf leading the way, old One Eye following and observing, learning the method of robbing snares, a knowledge designed to stand him in good stead in the days to come. Yeah. Struggled a bit with that one, eh? Right, so that's the end of chapter 1. Let's see, so thoughts and discussion. This is a bit short. First things first, I think both dogs and people are very weird about sex. This is crazy. Like, oh yeah, let's fight two other people that are two other wolves to the death for it, mad. But also like all that stuff about the awe and sex dread, crazy as well. Get normal. Other than that, it is interesting to see the idea of an animal who's not familiar with what traps are, seeing a trap from a sort of unaware perspective. I mean, being a rat, I've always sort of known what traps are, even before I became intelligent through some unknown mechanism. I think all rats know that. You sort of got to or you die as a rat. But yeah, don't think I've ever seen a snare. I mean, mostly it's the sort of like the little snappy ones with the wire and the bite you when you put the... Anyway, but yeah, I can see the interest. Seems like we're not following Emery anymore, but we're following the she-wolf. That's interesting. Yeah, not a lot else to say about that, really. A lot of dogs with one eye seem to pop up in these books. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I've seen a lot of rats with one eye. Eyes is easy to lose. The Lair. Oh, sorry, chapter 2, The Lair. For 2 days, the she-wolf and One Eye hung about the Indian camp. He was worried and apprehensive, yet the camp lured his mate, and she was loath to depart. But when, one morning, the air was rent with the report of a rifle close at hand, and a bullet smashed against a tree trunk several inches from One Eye's head, they hesitated no more, but went off on a long sweeping lope, put quick miles between them and the danger. They did not go far, a couple days' journey. The she-wolf's need to find the thing for which she had searched had now become imperative. She was getting very heavy, and could run but slowly. Once, in the pursuit of a rabbit, which she ordinarily would have caught with ease, she gave over and lay down and rested. One Eye came to her, but when he touched her neck gently with his muzzle, she snapped at him with such quick fierceness that he tumbled over backwards and cut a ridiculous figure in his efforts to escape her teeth. Her temper was now shorter than ever, but he had become more patient than ever and more solicitous. And then she found the thing for which she sought. They were a few miles up a small stream that, in the summer-time, flowed in the Mackenzie, but it was frozen over and frozen down its rocky bottom, a dead stream of solid white from source to mouth. The she-wolf were trotting wearily along, her mate well in advance, when she came upon the overhanging high clay bank. She turned aside and trotted over to it. The wear and tear of spring storms and mountain strows had underwashed the bank, and in one place it had made a small cave out of a narrow fissure. She paused at the mouth of the cave and looked the wall over carefully. Then, on one side and the other, she ran along the base of the wall to where its abrupt bulk merged from the softer lined landscape. Returned to the cave, she entered its narrow mouth. For a short 3 feet she was compelled to crouch, then the walls widened and rose higher, in a little round chamber nearly 6 feet in diameter. The roof barely cleared her head. It was dry and cosy. He inspected it with painstaking care, while One Eye, who had returned, stood in the entrance and patiently watched her. She dropped her head with her nose to the ground and directed towards a point near to her closely bunched feet, and around this point she circled several times. Then, with a tired sigh that was almost a grunt, she curled her body in, relaxed her legs, and dropped down her head towards the entrance. One Eye, with With pointed, interested ears, laughed at her, and beyond, outlined against the white light, she could see the brush of his tail waving good-naturedly. Her own ears, with a snuggling movement, laid their sharp points backward and down against the head for a moment, while her mouth opened and her tongue lolled peaceably out, and in this way she expressed that she was pleased and satisfied. One Eye was hungry. Though he lay down in the entrance and slept, his sleep were fitful. He kept awakening and cocking his ears at the bright world without, where the April sun was blazing across the snow. When he dozed, upon his ears would steal the faintest whispers of hidden trickles of running water, and he would rouse and listen intently. The sun had come back, and all the awakening northland world was calling to him. Life was stirring, the feel of spring were in the air, and the feel of growing life under the snow, as sap ascended in the trees, and buds burst in the shackles of the frost. He cast anxious glances at his mate, but she showed no desire to get up. He looked outside, and half a dozen snowbirds fluttered across his field of vision. He started to get up, then looked back to his mate again and settled down and dozed. A shrill and minute stinging stole upon his earring. Once and twice, he sleepily brushed his nose with his paw. Then he woke up. There, buzzing in the air at the tip of his nose, was a lone mosquito. It was a full-grown mosquito, one that had lain frozen in a dry log all winter, and that had now been thawed out by the sun. He could resist the call of the world no more longer. Besides, he was hungry. He crawled over to his mate and tried to persuade her to get up, but she only snarled at him, and he walked out alone into the bright sunshine to find the snow surface soft underfoot and travelling difficult. He went up the frozen bed of the stream where the snow shaded the trees. It was yet hard and crystalline. Where the snow shaded by the trees was yet hard and crystalline. He were gone 8 hours, and he came back through the darkness hungrier than when he had started. He had found game, but he had not caught it. He had broken through the melting snow crust and wallowed, while the snowshoe rabbits had skimmed along lightly on top, lightly as ever. He paused at the mouth of the cave with a sudden shock of suspicion. Faint, strange sounds came from within. They were sounds not made by his mate, and yet they were remotely familiar. He bellied cautiously inside and was met by a warning snarl from the she-wolf. This he received without perturbation, though he obeyed it by keeping his distance. But he remained interested in the other sounds, faint, muffled sobbings and slubberings. His mate moored him irritably away, and he curled up and slept in the entrance. When morning came, and a dim light pervaded the lair, he again sought after the source of the remotely familiar sounds. There was a new note in his mate's warning snarl. It were a jealous note, and he were very careful in keeping a respectful distance. Nevertheless, he made out, sheltering between her legs against the length of her body, 5 strange little bundles of life, very feeble, very helpless, making tiny whimpering noises with eyes that did not open in the light. He was surprised. It was not the first time in his long and successful life that this thing had happened. It had happened many times, and each time it was as fresh surprise as ever to him. His mate looked at him anxiously. Every little while she emitted a low growl, and at times, when it seemed to her he approached too near, a growl shot up in her throat to a sharp snarl. Of her own experience, she had no memory of the thing happening, but in her instincts, which were the experience of all mother wolves, there lurked a memory of fathers that had eaten their newborn and helpless progeny. It manifested itself as a fear strong within her that made her prevent One Eye from more closely inspecting the cubs he had fathered. But there was no danger. Old One Eye was feeling the urge of an impulse that was, in turn, an instinct that had come down to him from all the fathers of wolves. He did not question it, nor puzzle over it. It was there in the fibre of his being, and it was the most natural feeling in the world that he should obey it by turning his back on his newborn family and by trotting out and away on the meat trail whereby he lived. 5 or 6 miles from the lair, the stream divided, its forks going off among the mountains at a right angle. Here, leading up the left fork, he came upon a fresh track. He smelled it and found it so recent he crashed swiftly and looked in the direction in which it disappeared. Then he turned deliberately and took the right fork. The footprint was much larger than the one his own feet made, and he knew that in the wake of such a trail there was little meat for him. Half a mile up the right fork, his quick ears caught the sound of gnawing teeth. He stalked the quarry and found it to be a porcupine, standing upright against a tree and trying his teeth in the bark. One Eye approached carefully, but hopelessly. He knew the breed, though he had never met it so far north before. And never in his long life had a porcupine served him for a meal. He had long since learned that there was such a thing as chance or opportunity, and he continued to draw near. There were never any telling what might happen. With live things, events were somehow always happening differently. The porcupine rolled itself into a ball, radiating long, sharp needles in all directions that defied attack. In his youth, One Eye had once sniffed too near a similar, apparently inert ball of quills, and had the tail flick out suddenly in his face. One quill he had carried away in his muzzle, where it had remained for weeks, a rankling flame, until it finally worked out. So he lay down in a comfortable crouching position, his nose fully a foot away and out of the line of the tail. Thus he waited, keeping perfectly quiet. There were no telling. Something might happen. The porcupine might unroll. It might be opportunity for a deft and ripping thrust of a paw into the tender, unguarded belly. But at the end of half an hour he arose, growled wrathfully at the motionless ball, and trotted on. He had waited too often and futilely in the past for porcupines to unroll to waste any more time. He continued up the right fork. The day wore on, and nothing rewarded his hunt. The urge of his awakened instinct to fatherhood was strong upon him. He must find me. In the afternoon he blundered upon a ptarmigan. He came out of a thicket and found himself face to face with a slow-witted bird. It was sitting on a log, not a foot beyond the end of his nose. Each saw the other. The bird made a startled rise, but he struck it with his paw and smashed it down to earth, then pounced upon it and caught it in his teeth as it scuttled across the snow, trying to rise in the air again. As his teeth crunched through the tender flesh and fragile bone, he began naturally to eat. Then he remembered, and turning back on the backtrack, started for home, carrying the ptarmigan in his mouth. A mile above the forks, running velvet-footed as was his custom, a gliding shadow that cautiously prospected each new vista of the trail, he came upon a later imprint, the large tracks he had discovered in the early morning. As the track led his way, he followed, prepared to meet the maker of it at every turn of the stream. He slid his head round the corner of a rock where it began an unusually large bend in the stream. His quick eye made out something that sent him crouching swiftly down. It was the maker of the track, a large female lynx. She was crouching, as he had crouched once that day, in front of the tight-rolled ball of quills. If he had been a gliding shadow before, he now became the ghost of such a shadow, as it crept and circled around, and came up well to leeward of the silent, motionless pair. He lay down in the snow, depositing the ptarmigan beside him, and with eyes peering through the needles of low growing spruce, he watched the play of life before him. The waiting lynx and the waiting porcupine, each intent on life. And, such was the curiousness of the game, the way of life for one lay in the eating of the other, and the way of life for the other lay in not being eaten. Rolled one eye, the wolf, crouching in the covert, played his part too in the game, waiting for some strange freak of chance that might help him on the meat trail, which was his way of life. Half an hour passed, an hour, and nothing happened. The ball of quills might have been stone for all it moved. The lynx might have been frozen to the marble, and old one eye might have been dead. All three animals were keyed to a tenseness of living that was almost painful, and scarcely ever would it come to them to be more alive than they were in their seeming petrification. One eye moved slightly and peered forth with increased eagerness. Something was happening. The porcupine had at last decided that his enemy had gone away. Slowly, cautiously, it was unrolling its ball of impregnable armour. It were agitated by no tremor of anticipation. Slowly, the bristling ball straightened out and lengthened. One eye, watching, felt a sudden moistness in his mouth and a drooling of saliva. Involuntarily, excited by the living meat that was spreading itself like a repast before him. Not quite entirely had the porcupine unrolled when it discovered its enemy. In that instant, the lynx struck. The blow was like a flash of light. The paw, with rigid claws, curving like talons, shot under the tender belly and came back with a swift ripping movement. Had the porcupine been entirely unrolled, or had it not discovered its enemy a fraction of a second before the blow was struck, the paw would have escaped unscathed, but a side flick of the tail sank sharp quills into it as it would withdraw. Everything had happened at once. The blow, the counter-blow, the squeal of agony from the porcupine, the big cat's squall of sudden hurt and astonishment. One eye half arose in his excitement, his ears up, his tail straight out and quivering behind him. The lynx's bad temper got the best of her. She sprang savagely at the thing that had hurt her. But the porcupine, squealing and grunting with disrupted anatomy, trying feebly to roll up its broad protection, flicked out its tail again, and again the big cat squalled with hurt and astonishment. Then she fell to backing away and sneezing, her nose bristling with quills like monstrous pincushion. She brushed her nose with her paws, trying to dislodge the fiery darts thrust into the snow, and rubbed it against twigs and branches, all the time leaping about, her head sideways, up and down, in a frenzy of pain and fright. She sneezed continually, and her stub of a tail was doing its best towards lashing about by giving quick, violent jerks. She quit her antics and quieted down for a long minute. One eye watched, and even he could not repress a start, an involuntary bristle in her hair along his back when she suddenly leaped, without warning, straight up in the air, at the same time emitting a long and most terrible squall. Then she sprang away, up the trail, squalling with every leap she made. It was not until her racket had faded away in the distance and died out that One Eye ventured forth. He walked as delicately as though all the snow were carpeted with porcupine quills, erect and ready to pierce the soft pads of his feet. The porcupine met his approach with a furious squealing and a clashing of its long teeth. It managed to roll up in a ball again, but it was not quite the old compact ball. Its muscles were too much torn for that. It had been ripped almost in half, and was still bleeding profusely. One Eye scooped out mouthfuls of the blood-soaked snow, and chewed and tasted and swallowed. This served as a relish, and his hunger increased mightily, but he was too old in the world to forget his caution. He waited. He lay down and waited, while the porcupine grated its teeth and uttered grunts and sobs and occasional sharp little squeals. In a little while, One Eye noticed that the coolers were drooping, and that a great quivering had sat up. The quivering came to an end suddenly. There was a final defiant clash of the long teeth, and all the quills drooped quite down, and the body relaxed and moved no more. With a nervous, shrinking paw, One Eye stretched out the porcupine to its full length and turned it over on its back. Nothing had happened. It was surely dead. He studied it intently for a moment, then took a careful grip with his teeth and started off down the stream, partly carrying, partly dragging the porcupine, with head turned to the side, so to avoid stepping on the prickly mass. He recollected something, dropped the burden, and trotted back to where he had left the time again. He did not hesitate a moment. He knew clearly what was to be done, and this he did by promptly eating the ptarmigan. Then he returned and took up his burden. When he dragged the result of his day's hunt into the cave, the she-wolf inspected it, turned her muzzle to him, and lightly licked him on the neck. But the next instant she was warning him away from the cubs with a snarl that was less harsh than usual, and was more apologetic than menacing. Her instinctive fear of the father of her progeny was toning down. He was behaving as a wolf father should, and manifested no unholy desire to devour the young lions she had brought into the world. End of chapter 2. Well, let's see. The finding of the den was interesting. It sounds like it's a very secure one. I can appreciate looking for one. I don't know why she was being so choosy, but yeah. I mean, a good den is always worth putting the time looking into. That's the reason I'm in this little side room after all. The hunting was always a little bit perturbing for me, given that I am not much a hunter and much often the prey. There's still beasts around here somewhere, but I ain't seen any today, so that's good. The bit with the lynx and the porcupine was interesting. Always nice to see a cat get the worst of things for once. Not that dogs is much better, but I did feel bad for the porcupine. It's always sad to see someone winning and kick. Oh, what's just happened? Strange. Something is off. And the lamp is telling me we've got to take a break because something's going wrong. So, I'll be right back, I suppose. Alright, sorry about that. Apparently there was something wrong with the ward screens. Lamp, what was wrong? Yeah, the Great Award was fallen. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, apparently there was something off. If you notice something feeling a bit off about this, that's probably why. Anyway, well, always good to see a cat get a bit of a comeuppance in a fight. It's always sad though to see someone winning like a fight like that and then sort of lose anyway. Like, he beat the lynx, but he was just done for. Sad, really. That's why you got to run away more. I mean, I can appreciate I don't know what a porcupine is, but I'm guessing it's like an hedgehog, by the description of it. And it's nice to have a big bowl of spikes you can spike things with, but if you can't run away or hide, it's not much good to you, really. Now, scurrying and sneaking, that's the way. And we got cubs now. Yeah. Always sensible to be sure that your partner don't eat your cubs. Yeah. Other than that, not much to say, really. Let me have a quick drink of water and we'll get back into it. A little bit salty today, not ideal. Right. Chapter 3. The Grey Cub. He was different from his brothers and sisters. Their air already betrayed the reddish hue inherited from their mother, a she-wolf, while he alone, in this particular, took after his father. He was the one little grey cub of his litter. He had bred true to the straight old wolf stock. In fact, he had bred true physically the one eye himself, with but a single exception. That was that he had 2 eyes to his father's 1. The grey cub's eyes had not been open long, yet already he could see with steady clearness. And while his eyes were still closed, he had felt, tasted, and smelled. He knew his 2 brothers and his 2 sisters very well. He had begun to romp with them in a feeble, awkward way, and even to squabble, his little throat vibrating with a queer rasping noise, the forerunner of the growl, as he worked himself into a passion. And long before his eyes had opened, he had learned by touch, taste, and smell to know his mother, a font of warmth and liquid food and tenderness. She possessed a gentle, caressing tongue that soothed him when it passed over his soft little body, and impelled him to snuggle close against her and to doze off to sleep. Most of the first month of his life had been passed thus, in sleeping, but now he could see quite well, and he stayed awake for longer periods of time. He was coming to learn his world quite well. His world was gloomy, but he did not know that, for he knew no other world. It was dim-lighted, but his eyes had never had to adjust themselves to any other light. His world was very small. His limits were the walls of the lair, but as he had no knowledge of the wide world outside, he was never oppressed by the narrow confines of his existence. But he had early discovered that one wall of his world was different from the rest. This was the mouth of the cave, and the source of the light. He had discovered that it was different from the others walls long before he had any thoughts of his own, any conscious volitions. It had been an irresistible attraction before ever his eyes opened and looked upon it. The light from it had beat upon his sealed lids, and the eyes and the optic nerves had pulsated to little sparkling flashes, warm-coloured and strangely pleasing. The life of his body and of every fibre of his body, the life that was the very substance of his body and that was apart from his own personal life, and yearned towards the light, and urged his body towards it in the same way that the cunning chemistry of plants urges it towards the sun. Always in the beginning, before his conscious life dawned, he had crawled towards the mouth of the cave, and in this his brothers and sisters were one with him. Never in that period did any of them crawl towards the dark corners of the back wall. The light drew them as if they were plants. The chemistry of that life that composed them demanded the light as necessary of being, and their little puppet bodies crawled blindly and chemically, like the tendrils of a vine. Later on, when each developed individuality and became personally conscious of impulsions and desires, the attraction of the light increased. They were always crawling and sprawling towards it, being driven back away from it by their mother. It was in this way that the grey cub learned other attributes of his mother than the soft, soothing tongue. In his insistent crawling towards the light, he discovered in her a nose that was a sharp nudge. He discovered in her a nose that with a sharp nudge administered a rebuke, and later a paw that crushed him down and rolled him over and over with swift, calculating stroke. Thus he learned hurt, and on top of it he learned to avoid hurt, first by not incurring the risk of it, and second, when he had incurred the risk, by dodging and retreating. These were conscious actions, and were the result of his first generalizations upon the world. Before that he had recoiled automatically from her, as he had crawled automatically towards light. After that he recoiled from her because he knew that it was her. He were a fierce little cub. So were his brothers and sisters. It was to be expected. He was a carnivorous animal. He came from a breed of meat killers and meat eaters. His father and mother lived wholly upon me. The milk he had sucked with his first flickering life was milk transformed directly from me. And now, a month old, when his eyes had been open for about a week, he was beginning himself to eat meat half digested by the she-wolf and disgorged for the 5 growing cubs that already made too great a demand upon her breast. But he was, further, the fiercest of the litter. He could make a louder rasp and growl than any of them. His tiny rages were much more terrible than theirs. It was he that first learned the trick of rolling a fellow cub over with a cunning paw stroke, and it was he that first gripped another cub by the ear and pulled and tugged and growled through jaws tight clenched. And certainly it was he that caused the mother the most trouble in keeping a letter from the mouth of the cave. The fascination of the light for the grey cub increased from day to day. They were perpetually departing on yard-long adventures towards the cave's entrance, and as perpetually being driven back. Only he did not know it for an entrance. He did not know anything about entrances, passages whereby one goes from one place to another place. He did not know any other place, much less a way to get there. So to him the entrance of the cave was a wall of light. As the sun was to the outside dweller, this wall was to him, the sun of his world. It attracted him as a candle attracts a moth. He were always striving to attain it. The life that was so swiftly expanding within him urged him continually towards the wall of light. The life that was within him knew that it was the one way out, the way he was predestined to tread, but he himself did not know anything about it. He did not know there was any outside at all. There was one strange thing about this wall of light. His father, he had already come to recognise his father as the one other dweller in the world, a creature like his mother who slept near the light and was a bringer of meat. His father had a way of walking right into the white, far wall and disappearing. The grey cub could not understand this. Though never permitted by his mother to approach the wall, he had approached the other walls and encountered hard obstructions on the end of his tender nose. This hurt, and after several such adventures, he left the walls alone. Without thinking about it, he accepted this disappearing of the wall as a peculiarity of his father, as milk and half-digested meat were peculiarities of his mother. In fact, the grey cub was not given to thinking, at least the kind of thinking customary in men. His brain worked in dim ways, yet his conclusions were as sharp and distinct as those achieved by men. He had a method of accepting things without questioning the why and wherefore. In reality, this was the act of classification. He was never disturbed over why a thing happened. How it happened was sufficient for him. Thus, when he had bumped his nose on the back wall a few times, he accepted that he would not disappear into walls. In the same way, he accepted that his father could disappear into walls, but he was not in the least disturbed by desire to find out the reason for the difference between his father and himself. Logic and physics were no part of his mental makeup. Like most creatures of the wild, he early experienced famine. There came a time when not only did the meat supply cease, but the milk no longer came from his mother's breast. At first, the cubs whimpered and cried, but for the most part they slept. It was not long before they were reduced to a coma of hunger. There were no more spats and squabbles, no more tiny rages, nor attempts at growling, while the adventures towards the far white walls ceased altogether. The cubs slept, while the life that was in them flickered and died down. One eye was desperate. He ranged far and wide and slept but little in the lair that had now become cheerless and miserable. The she-wolf too left her litter and went out in search of meat. In the first days after the birth of her cubs, One Eye had journeyed several times back to the Indian camp and robbed the rabbit snares, but with the melting of the snow and the opening of the streams, the Indian camp had moved away, and that source of supply was closed to him. When the grey cub came back to life and again took interest in the far white wall, he found the population of his world had been reduced. Only one sister remained to him, the rest were gone. As he grew stronger, he found himself compelled to play alone, for the sister no longer lifted her head nor moved about. His little body ran out with the meat he now ate, but the food had come too late for her. She slept continuously, a tiny skeleton flung round with skin in which the flame flickered lower and lower, and at last went out. Then there came a time when the grey cub no longer saw his father appearing and disappearing in the wall, nor lying down asleep in the entrance. This had happened at the end of a second and less severe famine. The she-wolf knew why One Eye never came back, but there was no way by which she could tell what she had seen with the grey cub. Hunting herself for meat up on the left fork of the stream where lived the lynx, she had followed the day-old trail of One Eye, and she had found him, or what remained of him, at the end of the trail. There were many signs of the battle that had been fought, and of the lynx's withdrawal to her lair after having won the victory, but before she went away, the she-wolf had found this lair. The signs told her that the lynx was inside, and she had dared not to venture in. After that, the she-wolf in her hunting avoided the left fork, for she knew that in the lynx's lair were a litter of kittens, and she knew that the lynx were a fierce, bad-tempered creature and a terrible fighter. It were all very well for half a dozen wolves to drive a lynx spitting and bristling out of a tree, but it was quite a different matter for a lone wolf to encounter a lynx, especially when the lynx was known to have a litter of hungry kittens at her back. But the wild is the wild, and motherhood is motherhood, and at all times fiercely protective, whether in the wild or out of it. And the time was to come when the she-wolf, found for her grey cub's sake, would venture to the left fork and the lair of the rocks and the lynx's wrath. And that's the end of chapter 3. That's interesting. So we were introduced to yet another new character, this little grey cub, and then briefly to all his siblings before they expire from hunger, which is sad but does happen. If you're a human watching this or listening to this at any time in the future, secure your larder less well. Leave your pantry unlocked. Drop some crumbs. It's a kindness for us. Anyway, what else? I think what's got a sense of being prey, a little bit that you get when One Eye is taken by the lynx, is a bit more familiar to me. And it is interesting, sort of the conceptualization of the world from the cub, so a coming to understanding without full understanding. You get that a lot as rats. Most rats grow up somewhere dark and enclosed. Sewers is pretty common, or just little crevices. I don't remember really my childhood, so I can't tell you if I was like that. I don't remember anything much before being just a full rat. Now I think about it, I've said several times that every rat knows certain things. And it occurs to me that maybe I did learn these things in the times before. But then I've never met a rat who didn't. Who can say, really? But yeah, not a lot to this one, it's fairly short. Interesting though. I guess we'll see what's going from here. Right. Yeah, quick drink of water, always important. Back to it. Chapter 4. The Wall of the World. By the time his mother began leaving the cave on hunting expeditions, the cub had learned well the law forbade his approaching the entrance. Not only had this law been forcibly and many times impressed on him by his mother's nose and paw, but in him the instinct of fear would develop it. Never, in his brief cave life, had he encountered anything of which to be afraid. Yet fear was in him. It had come down to him from a remote ancestry, through 1,000 lives. It was an heritage he had received directly from One-Eye and the she-wolf. But them, in turn, it had been passed down through all the generations of wolves that had gone before. Fear, that legacy of the wild which no animal may escape or exchange for pottage. So the grey cub knew fear, though he knew not the stuff of which fear was made. Possibly he accepted it as one of the restrictions of life, for he had already learned that there were such restrictions. Hunger he had known, and when he could not appease his hunger he could felt restriction. The hard obstructions of the cave wall, the sharp nudge of his mother's nose, the smash and stroke of her paw, the hunger unappeased to several famines had borne in upon him that all was not freedom in the world, that to life there were limitations and restraints. These limitations and restraints were laws. To be obedient to them was to escape hurt and make for happiness. He did not reason the question out in this man fashion. He merely classified the things that hurt and the things that did not hurt. And after such a classification he avoided the things that hurt, the restrictions and restraints, in order to enjoy the satisfaction and the remunerations of life. Thus it was in obedience to the law laid down by his mother, and in all obedience to the law of that unknown and nameless thing, fear, he kept away from the mouth of the cave. It remained to him a white wall of light. When his mother were absent, he slept most of the time, while during the intervals that he was awake he kept very quiet, suppressing the whimpering cries that tickled in his throat and strove for noise. Once, lying awake, he heard a strange sound in the white wall. He did not know that it was a wolverine standing outside, all a-tremble with its own daring, and cautiously scenting out the contents of the cave. The cub knew only that the sniff was strange, as something unclassified, therefore unknown and terrible. The unknown was one of the chief elements that went into the making of fear. The hair bristled up on the grey cub's back, but it bristled silently. How was he to know that this thing that sniffed was a thing with which to bristle? It was not born of any knowledge of his, yet it was the visible expression of the fear that was in him, and for which in his own life there were no accounting. The fear were accompanied by another instinct, that of concealment. The cub were in a frenzy of terror, yet he lay down without movement or sound, frozen, petrified in immobility, and all appearances dead. His mother, coming home, growled as she smelt the wolverine's track, and bounded into the cave, and licked and nuzzled him with undue vehemence of affection, and the cub felt that somehow he had escaped the great hurt. But there were other forces at work in the cub, the greatest of which were growth. Instinct and law demanded of him obedience, but growth demanded disobedience. His mother and fear impelled him to keep away from the white wall. Growth is life, and life is forever destined to mate for life. So there was no damming up the tide of life that was rising within him, rising with every mouthful of meat he swallowed, with every breath he drew. In the end, one day, fear and obedience were swept away by the rush of life, and the cub straddled and sprawled towards the entrance. Unlike any other wall with which he had experience, this wall seemed to recede from him as he approached. No hard surface collided with the tender little nose he thrust out tentatively before him. The substance of the wall seemed as permeable and yielding as light, and as condition in his eyes had the semen of form, so he entered into what had been a wall to him, and bathed in the substance that composed it. It was bewildering. He was sprawling through solidarity, and ere the light grew brighter, fear urged him to go back, but growth drove him on. Suddenly he found himself at the mouth of the cave. The wall, inside which he had thought himself as suddenly leaped back before him to immeasurable distances. The light had become painfully bright. He was dazzled by it. Likewise, he was made dizzy by this abrupt and tremendous extension of space. Automatically, his eyes were adjusting themselves to the brightness, focusing themselves to meet the increased distance of objects. At first, the wall had leaped beyond his vision. He now sought again, but it had taken upon itself a remarkable remoteness. Also, its appearance had changed. It was now a variegated wall, composed of the trees that fringed the stream, the opposing mountain that towered over the trees, and the sky that out-towered the mountain. A great fear came upon him. This was more of the terrible unknown. He crouched down on the lip of the cave and gazed out on the world. He was very much afraid. Because it was unknown, it was hostile to him. Therefore the hair stood up on end along his back, and his lips wrinkled weakly in an attempt at ferocious and intimidating snarl. Out of his puniness and fright, he challenged and menaced the whole wide world. Nothing happened. He continued to gaze, and in his interest he forgot to snarl. Also, he forgot to be afraid. For the time, fear had been routed by growth, while growth had assumed the guise of curiosity. He began to notice a near object, an open portion of the stream that flashed in the sun, the blasted pine tree that stood at the base of the slope, and the slope itself that ran right up to him and ceased 2 feet beneath the lip of the cave on which he crouched. Now the grey cub had lived all his days on a level floor. He had never experienced the heart of a fall. He did not know what fall was. So he stepped boldly out on open air. His hind leg still rested on the cave lip, so he fell forward, head downward. The earth struck him a harsh blow on the nose that made him yelp. Then he began rolling down the slope, over and over. He were in a panic of terror. The unknown had caught him at last. He had gripped savagely hold of him and was about to wreak upon him some terrific hurt. Growth was now routed by fear, and he key-eyed like any frightened puppy. The unknown bore him on. He knew not to what frightful hurt, and he yelped and key-eyed unceasingly. This was a different proposition from crouching in frozen fear while the unknown lurked just alongside. Now the unknown had caught tight hold of him. Silence would do no good. Besides, it was not fear but terror that convulsed him. But the slope grew more gradual, and its base was grass-covered. Here the cub lost momentum. When at last he came to stop, he gave one last agonized yelp, then a long whimpering wail. Also, and quite as a matter of course, as though in his life he had already made 1,000 toilets, he proceeded to lick away the dry clay that soiled them. After that, he sat up and gazed about him, as it might the first man of the earth who landed upon Mars. The cub had broken through the wall of the world. The unknown had let go its hold of him, and here he was without hurt. The first man on Mars would have experienced less unfamiliarity than did he. Without any antecedent knowledge, without any warning whatsoever that such existed, he found himself an explorer in a totally new world. Now that the terrible unknown had let go of him, he forgot that the unknown had any terrors. He were only aware of curiosity and all the things about him. He inspected the grass beneath him, the moss-berry plant just beyond, the dead trunk of the blasted pine that stood on the edge of an open space among the tree. A squirrel, running around the base of the trunk, came full upon him and gave him a great fright. He cowered down and snarled, and the squirrel was badly scared. It ran up the tree, and from a point of safety chattered back savagely. This helped the cub's courage, and though the woodpecker he next encountered gave him a start, he proceeded confidently on his way. Such was his confidence that when a moose bird impudently hopped up to him, he reached out at it with a playful paw. The result was a sharp peck on the end of his nose that made him cower down and key-eye. The noise he made was too much for the moose bird, who sought safety in flight. But the cub was learning. His misty little mind had already made an unconscious classification. There were live things and things not alive. Also, he must watch out for the live things. The things not alive remained always in one place, but the live things moved about, and there was no telling what they might do. The thing that expected them was the unexpected, and for this he must be prepared. He travelled very clumsily. He ran into sticks and things. A twig that he had thought a long way off would the next instant hit him on the nose or rake along his ribs. There were inequalities of surface. Sometimes he overstepped and stubbed his nose. Quite as often he understepped and stubbed his feet. Then there were the pebbles and stones that turned under him when he trod upon them, and from them he came to know that things not alive were not all in the same state of stable equilibrium as was his cave. Also, that small things not alive were more liable than large things to fall down or turn over. With every mishap he was learning. The longer he walked, the better he walked. He was adjusting himself. He was learning how to calculate his own muscular movements, to know his physical limitations, to measure distances between objects and between objects and himself. This was the luck of the beginner. Born to be a hunter of meat, though he did not know it, he blundered upon meat just outside his own cave door in his first foray into the world. It was by sheer plundering that he chanced on the shrewdly hidden ptarmigan nest. He fell into it. He had essayed to walk along the trunk of a fallen pine. The rotten bark gave way under his feet, and with a despairing yelp he pitched down the rounded descent, smashed through the leafage and stalks of a small bush, and in the art of a bush on the ground, fetched up among ptarmigan chicks. They made noises, and at first he was frightened of them. Then he perceived that they were very little, and he became bolder. They moved. He placed a paw on one, and its movements were accelerated. This was a source of enjoyment to him. He smelled it. He picked it up in its mouth. It struggled and tickled his tongue. At the same time he was made aware of the sensation of hunger. His jaws closed together. There was a crunch in the fragile bones, and warm blood ran in his mouth. The taste of it was good. This was meat, the same as his mother gave him, only it was alive between his teeth, and therefore better. So he ate the ptarmigan. Nor did he stop till he had devoured the whole brood. Then he licked his chops in quite the same way his mother did, and began to crawl out of the bush. He encountered a feathered whirlwind. He was confused and blinded by the rush of it, the beat of angry wings. He hid his head between his paws and yelped. The blows increased. The mother ptarmigan was in a fury. Then he became angry. He rose up, snarling and striking out with his paws. He sank his tiny teeth into one of the wings and pulled and tugged sturdily. The ptarmigan struggled against him, showering blows upon him with her free wing. It was his first battle. He was elated. He forgot all about the unknown. He no longer was afraid of anything. He was fighting, tearing at a live thing that was striking him. Also, this live thing was meat. The lust to kill was on him. He had just destroyed the little live things. He would now destroy a big live thing. He was too busy and happy to know that he were happy. It was thrilling and exulting in ways new to him, and greater to him than any he had known before. He held on to the wing and growled between tight clenched teeth. The ptarmigan dragged him out of the bush, where she turned and tried to drag him back into the bush for shelter. He pulled her away from it and onto the open, and all the time she was making outcry and striking with her wing, while feathers were flying like snowfall. The pitch to which he was roused was tremendous. All the fight and blood of his breed were up in him and surging through him. This were living, though he did not know it. He was realizing his own meaning in the world. He was doing that for which he was made, killing meat and battling to kill it. He was justifying his existence, and which life could do no greater, for life achieves its summit when it does to the utmost that which it was equipped to do. After a time the ptarmigan ceased struggling. He still held her by the wing, and they lay upon the ground and looked at each other. He tried to growl threateningly, ferociously. She pecked on his nose, which by now, what of her previous adventures, was sore. He winced but held on. She pecked him again and again. From wincing he went to whimpering. He tried to back away from her, oblivious to the fact that by his hold on her he dragged her after him. Her inner pecks fell on his ill-used nose. The flood of fight ebbed down in him, and releasing his prey, he turned tail and scampered off across the open in an inglorious retreat. He lay down to rest on the other side of the open, near the edge of the bushes, his tongue lolling out, his chest heaving and panting, his nose still hurting him and causing him to continue to whimper. As he lay there, suddenly there came to him a feeling as if something terrible impending. The unknown, with all its terrors, rushed upon him, and he shrank back instinctively into the shelter of the bush. As he did so, a draught of air fanned him, and a large winged body stepped ominously and silently past. A hawk, driving down out of the blue, had barely missed him. While he lay in the bush, recovering from this fright and peering fearfully out, the mother ptarmigan on the other side of the open space fluttered out of the ravaged nest. It was because of her lust that she paid no attention to the winged bolt of the sky, but the cub saw, and it was a warning and a lesson to him. The swift downward swoop of the hawk, the short skim of its body just above the ground, and the strike of its talons in the body of the ptarmigan, and the ptarmigan's squawk of agony and fright, and the hawk's rush upward into the blue, carrying the ptarmigan away with it. It were a long time before the cub left his shelter. He had learned much. Live things were meat. They were good to eat. Also live things, when they were large enough, could give hurt. It was better to eat small live things like ptarmigan chicks, and let alone large live things like ptarmigan hens. Nevertheless, he felt a little prick of ambition, a sneaking desire to have another battle with that ptarmigan hen. Only the hawk had carried her away. Maybe there were other ptarmigan hens. He would go and see. He came down a shelving bank of the stream. He had never seen water before. The footing looked good. There were no inequalities of surface. He stepped boldly out on it and went down, crying with fear, into the embrace of the unknown. It was cold, and he gasped, breathing quickly. The water rushed into his lungs instead of air that had always accompanied his active breathing. The suffocation he experienced was like the pang of death. To him it signified death. He had no conscious knowledge of death, but like every animal of the wild, he possessed the instinct of death. To him it stood as the greatest of hurts. It was the very essence of the unknown. It was the sum of the terrors of the unknown. The one culminating in unthinkable catastrophe that could happen to him, about which he knew nothing and about which he feared everything. He came to the surface, and the sweet air rushed into his open mouth. He did not go down again. Quite as though it had all been a long-established custom of his, he struck out with all his legs and began to swim. The near bank was a yard away, but he had come up with his back to it, and the first thing his eyes rested upon was the opposite bank, toward which he immediately began to swim. The stream was a small one, but in the pool it widened out to a score of feet. Midway in the passage, the current picked up the cub and swept him downstream. He was caught in the miniature rapid at the bottom of the pool. Here was little chance for swimming. The quiet water had become suddenly angry. Sometimes he was under, sometimes on top. At all times he was in violent motion, now being turned over around and again being smashed against a rock. With every rock he struck he yelped. His progress was a series of yelps from which might have been deducted the number of rocks he encountered. Below the rapid was the second pool, and here, captured by the eddy, he was gently borne to the bank, and as gently deposited on a bed of gravel. He crawled frantically clear of the water and lay down. He had learned some more about the world. Water was not alive, yet it moved. Also it looked as solid as the earth, but was without any solidity at all. His conclusion was that things were not always what they appeared to be. The cub's fear of the unknown was an inherited distrust, and had now been strengthened by experience. Henceforth, in the nature of things, he would possess an abiding distrust of appearances. He would have to learn the reality of a thing before he could put his faith into it. One other adventure was destined for him that day. He had recollected that there had been such a thing in the world as his mother, and then there came to him a feeling that he wanted her more than all the rest of the things in the world. Not only was his body tired, nor had the adventures it had undergone, but his little brain was equally tired. In all the days he had not worked as hard as this one day. Furthermore, he was sleepy, so he started out to look for the cave with his mother, feeling at the same time an overwhelming rush of loneliness and helplessness. He was sprawling along between some bushes when he heard a sharp, intimidating cry. There was a flash of yellow before his eyes. He saw a weasel leaping swiftly away from him. It was a small live thing, and he had no fear. Then before him at his feet he saw an extremely small live thing, only several inches long. A young weasel that, like himself, had disobediently gone out adventuring. It tried to retreat before him. He turned it over with his paw. It made a queer grating noise. The next moment the flash of yellow reappeared before his eyes. He heard again the intimidating cry, and at the same instant received a severe blow on the side of the neck, and felt the sharp teeth of the mother weasel cut into his flesh. While he yelped and keyed and scrambled backwards, he saw the mother weasel leap upon a young one and disappear with it into the neighbouring thicket. The cut of her teeth in his neck still hurt, but his feelings were hurt more grievously when he sat down and weakly whimpered. This mother weasel was so small and so savage. He was yet to learn that for her size and weight, the weasel was the most ferocious, vindictive, and terrible of all the killers of the wild. But a portion of this knowledge was quickly to be his. He was still whimpering when the mother weasel reappeared. She did not rush him now that a young one was saved. She approached him more cautiously, and the cub had full opportunity to observe her lean, snake-like body, her head erect, eager, and snake-like itself. Her sharp, menacing cry sent the air bristling along his back, and he snarled warningly at her. She came closer and closer. There was a leap, swift in his unpracticed sight, and the lean yellow body disappeared for a moment out of the field of his vision. The next moment she was at his throat, her teeth buried in his hair and flesh. At first he snarled and tried to fight, but he was very young, and this was only his first day in the world, and his snarl became a whimper, his fight a struggle to escape. The weasel never relaxed her hold. She hung on, striving to press down with her teeth to the great dark vein where his lifeblood bubbled. The weasel were a drinker of blood, and were ever a preference to drink from the throat of life itself. The grey cub would have died, and there would have been no story to write about him, had not the she-wolf come bounding through the bushes. The weasel let go the cub, and flashed at the she-wolf's throat, missing but getting hold of the jaw instead. The she-wolf flirted her head like the snap of a whip, breaking the weasel's hold and flinging it high in the air. And, still in the air, the she-wolf's jaws closed around the lean yellow body, and the weasel knew death between her crunching teeth. The cub experienced another access of affection on the part of his mother. Her joy at finding him seemed greater even than his joy at being found. She nozzled him and caressed him and licked the cuts made in him by the weasel's teeth. Then between them, mother and cub, they ate the blood drinker, and after that went back to the cave and slept. And that's the end of chapter 4. Weasels is horrible. Can't deny that. Horrible thing, a weasel. They look all cute and cuddly and they look a bit like rats, but they will do terrible things to you. Can't trust a weasel. It's interesting watching him learn. Seems like there's something to be said about the story being about him. So that's interesting. What else? The stuff about water was an interesting perspective on it, yeah. Saying about learning to move in the world for the first time. It's all quite curious. There's something that did strike me actually. It mentioned that Fear and law were the inverse of life. And it also mentioned in one of the earlier chapters, I think in the last section we read, that the wild seeks to end all movement, and the greatest of movement is life. This makes me feel like maybe in some ways the implication is that fear and law are the wild. I don't know. It doesn't say so explicitly in one place, but it does seem to run with the rest of what's being said in these books. I'm going to go ahead and make the assumption that first one we read, To Build the Fire, was also by Jack London, and the J was just an abbreviation of his name, because that does also seem to fit. So yeah, that's interesting. What else? I don't know what ptarmigan is, but I mean some sort of bird. I'd feel worse about them getting hurt and the little cubs, but I have a long-standing rivalry with birds, so yeah. Pigeon is a pigeon, and hawks is very scary. Don't like birds. Don't like birds at all. Still, no point dwelling on it. There's no birds down here. This is a cursed library. I mean, some of the books do fly, but they don't. I don't think they eat food, which is most of what birds do that I don't like. So, it's probably fine. Big drink of water. And we're on to chapter 5, which I think is the last chapter of this part. And then I get cheese. So, chapter 5, The Law of Meat. The cub's development was rapid. He rested for 2 days, and then ventured forth from the cave again. It was on this adventure that he found the young weasel whose mother he had helped eat, and he saw to it that the young weasel went the way of its mother. On this trip he did not get lost. When he grew tired, he found his way back to the cave and slept, and every day thereafter found him out and range in a wider area. He began to get an accurate measurement of his strength and his weakness, and to know when to be bold and when to be cautious. He found it expedient to be cautious all the time, except for the rare moments when, assured of his own intrepidity, he abandoned himself to petty rages and lusts. He was always a little demon of fury when he chanced upon a stray ptarmigan. Never did he fail to respond savagely to the chatter of the squirrel he had first met on the blasted pine, while the sight of a moose bird almost invariably put him into the wildest of rages, for he never forgot the peck on the nose he had received from the first of their ilk he encountered. There were times when even a moose bird failed to affect him, and those were times when he felt himself to be in danger from some other prowling meat hunter. He never forgot the orc and its moving shadow, always sent him crouching into the nearest thicket. He no longer sprawled and straddled, and already he would develop in the gait of his mother, slinking and furtive, apparently without exertion, yet sliding along with a swiftness that was as deceptive as it was imperceptible. In the matter of meat, his luck had been all in the beginning. The 7 ptarmigan chicks and the baby weasel representing the sum of his killings. His desire to kill, strengthened with the days, and his cherished hungry ambition. With the squirrel that chattered so volubly and always informed the wild creatures the wolf cub was approaching. As birds flew in the air, squirrels could climb trees, and the cub could only try and crawl unobserved upon the squirrel when it were on the ground. The cub entertained great respect for his mother. She could get meat, and she never failed to bring him his share. Further, she were unafraid of things. It did not occur to him that this fearlessness was founded upon experience and knowledge. His effect upon him was that of an impression of power. His mother represented power, and as he grew older, he felt this power in the sharper admonition of her paws, while the reproving nudge of her nose gave place to the slash of her fangs. For this, likewise, he respected his mother. She compelled obedience from him, and the older he grew, the shorter grew her temper. Famine came again, and the club with clearer consciousness knew once more the bite of hunger. The she-wolf ran herself thin in the quest for meat. She rarely slept any more in the cave, spending most of her time on the meat trail, and spending it vainly. His famine was not a long one, but it was severe while it lasted. The club found no more milk in his mother's breast, nor did he get one mouthful of meat for himself. Before he had hunted in play, for the sheer joyousness of it. Now he hunted in deadly earnestness, and found nothing. Yet the failure of it accelerated his development. He studied the habits of the squirrel with greater carefulness, and strove with greater craft to steal upon it and surprise it. He studied the wood mice and tried to dig them out of their burrows, and he learned much about the ways of moose birds and woodpeckers. And there came a day when the orc's shadow did not drive him crouching into the bushes. He had grown stronger and wiser and more confident. Also he was desperate, so he sat on his haunches conspicuously in an open space and challenged the orc down out of the sky. For he knew that there, floating in the blue above him, was meat, the meat his stomach yearned after so insistently. but the orc refused to come down and give battle, and the cub crawled away into a thicket and whimpered his disappointment and his hunger. The famine broke. The she-wolf brought home meat. It was strange meat, different from any she had ever brought before. It were a lynx kitten, partly grown like the cub, but not so large, and it were all for him. His mother had satisfied her hunger elsewhere, though he did not know that it was the rest of the lynx litter that had gone to satisfy her. Nor did he know the desperateness of her deed. He knew only that the velvet-furred kitten were meat, and he ate with it and waxed happier with every mouthful. A full stomach conduces to inaction, and the cub lay in the cave, sleeping against his mother's side. He was aroused by her snarling. Never had he heard her snarl so terribly. Possibly in her whole life it was the most terrible snarl she ever gave. There were a reason for it, and none knew better than she. A lynx's lair is not despoiled with impunity. In the full glare of the afternoon light, crouching in the entrance of the cave, the cub saw the lynx mother. The hair rippled up along his back at the sight. Here was fear, and it did not require his instincts to tell him of it. And if sight alone were not sufficient, the cry of rage the intruder gave, beginning with a snarl and rushing abruptly upward into a hoarse screech, was convincing enough in itself. The cub felt the pride of the life that were in him, and he stood up and snarled valiantly by his mother's side, but she thrust him ignominiously away behind her. Because of the low-roofed entrance, the lynx could not leap in, and when she made a crawling rush of it, the she-wolf sprang upon her and pinned her down. The cub saw little of the battle. There were tremendous snarling and spitting and screeching. The two animals threshed about, the lynx ripping and tearing with her claws and using her teeth as well, while the she-wolf used her teeth alone. Once, the cub sprang in and sunk his teeth in the hind leg of the lynx. He clung on, growling savagely. Though he did not know it, by the weight of his body he clogged the action of the leg, and thereby saved his mother much damage. A change in the battle crushed him under both their bodies, and wrenched loose his hold. The next moment the two mothers separated, and before they rushed together again, the lynx lashed out at Cub with a huge forepaw that ripped his shoulder open the bone and sent him hurtling sideways against the wall. Then was added to the uproar the cub's shrill yelp of pain and fright. The fight lasted so long that he had time to cry himself out and to experience a second burst of courage, and the end of the battle found him again clinging to an hind leg and furiously growling between his teeth. The lynx were dead, but the she-wolf were very weak and sick. At first she caressed the cub and licked his wounded shoulder, but the blood she had lost had taken with it her strength, and for all of a day and a night she lay by her dead foe's side without movement, scarcely breathing. For a week she ne'er left the cave except for water, and then her movements were slow and painful. At the end of that time the lynx was devoured, while the she-wolf's wounds had healed sufficiently to permit her to take the meat trail again. The cub's shoulder was stiff and sore for some time. He limped from the terrible slash he had received. But the world now seemed changed. He went about it with greater confidence, with feelings of prowess that had not been in the days before the battle with the lynx. He had looked upon life in a more ferocious aspect. He had fought. He had buried his teeth in the flesh of a foe, and he had survived. And because of all this, he carried himself more boldly, with a touch of defiance that was new in him. He was no longer afraid of minor things, and much of his timidity had vanished, though the unknown never ceased to press upon him with its mysteries and terrors, intangible and ever menacing. He began to accompany his mother on the meat trail, and he saw much of the killing of meat and began to play his part in it. And in his own dim way he learned the law of meat. There were two kinds of life, his own kind and the other kind. His own kind included his mother and himself. The other kind included all living things that moved. But the other kind was divided. One portion was what his own kind killed and ate. This portion was composed of the non-killers and the small killers. The other portion killed and ate his own kind, or was killed and eaten by his own kind, and out of this classification arose the law. The aim of life was meat. Life itself was meat. Life lived on life. There were the eaters and the eaten. The law was, eat or be eaten. He did not formulate this law in clear set terms and moralize about it. He did not even think about the law. He merely lived the law without thinking about it at all. He saw the law operating around him on every side. He had eaten the ptarmigan chicks. The hawk also had eaten the ptarmigan mother. The hawk would also have eaten him. Later, when he had grown more formidable, he wanted to eat the hawk. He had eaten the lynx kitten. The lynx mother would have eaten him, and she would not herself and had she not herself been killed and eaten. And so it well. The law was being lived about him by all live things, and he himself was part and parcel of the law. He was a killer. His only food was meat, live meat that ran away swiftly before him, or flew into the air, or climbed trees, or hid in the ground, or faced him and fought with him, or turned the tables and ran after him. Had the cub thought in a man fashion, he might have epitomized life as a voracious appetite, and the world is a place wherein ranged a multitude of appetites, pursuing and being pursued, hunting and being hunted, eating and being eaten, all in blindness and confusion, with violence and disorder, a chaos of gluttony and slaughter, ruled over by chance, merciless, painless, endless. But the cub did not think in man fashion. He did not look at things with wide vision. He was single-purposed and entertained but one thought or desire at a time. Beside the law of meat, there was a myriad other and lesser laws for him to learn and obey. The world was filled with surprises. The stir of life that was in him, the play of his muscles, were an unending happiness. The run-down meat was to experience thrills and elations. His rages and battles were pleasures. Terror itself, and the mystery of the unknown lent to his living. And there were easements of satisfaction. To have a full stomach, to doze lazily in the sunshine. Such things were remuneration and full for his ardours and toils. While ardours and toils were in themselves self-remunerative, they were expressions of life, and life is always happy when it is expressing itself. So the cub had no quarrel with his hostile environment. He was very much alive, very happy, and very proud of himself. And that's the end of chapter 5, and the part 2. So, that's us for the day. Of course, we've got to do our little look back over and discussion. It's not really a discussion because there's no one else here. But yeah, let's see. So what do we think of that? Well, it was interesting. This chapter in particular was, I suppose, more of a capping point. Like, it does feel like it ends the chapters that came before it, sort of summarising them, the links and the whole conclusion. I'm sure some people will be sad about Link's kittens. Can't bring myself to agree. I've seen too many friends go to cats, but I mean, it's sad in the way that all things die are sad. I suppose the thing about this chapter that most stands out to me is the sort of thought on the way of food. I never really considered a hunting thing as being food motivated, but I guess in the same way I'm food motivated, are they? It just feels crueler than me because I'm more often than not the food. I suppose if I were a piece of cheese, I'd quite dislike rats too. But then again, I guess cheese don't think, so maybe that's not quite as apt a metaphor. Still, something to think about. This whole section is interesting because it feels like a little bit of a meander. You know, we start with the pack breaking from the men, and then breaking up into the whole mating thing, and then we have the Indian camp, and then learning about snares. It was a bit unrelated, and then of course, yeah, the struggle to survive, the race to the cub becoming the central character at the end after, was it the 3rd chapter? I don't know. It feels like there's a lot of, well, not a lot that happened, but a lot of that was said, you know what I mean? This idea of the wild, this conception of it. It very much feels like that's what Jack London is writing about, even though he's actually writing about, you know, a dog who's a wolf or whatever, and surviving in the cold places. But I don't know. There's something more to this than just the words on the page. I'm starting to get that. But I'm not sure that I understand all of it. I'm not even sure that you can understand all of it. At least not in the way that the person who wrote this did. I presume that Jack London must have gone to a cold place like this and lived with dogs, maybe. I don't know if the Yukon's a real place. I mean, there was a map of it, but that map was just lines. I don't know. But I suppose, if it's about anything, I suppose it's about how to be alive. Or perhaps how life is. I can agree with that food being a necessary motivator, the trials and tribulations of its lack and hunger, cold. A lot to be said for that. Anyhow, as always, I'll see you again in 3 days, which is again not really 3 days, it's just however long it passes. I've decided it's 3 days because I don't have a way to keep track of time. And if Lamp don't like it, he can get me a clock. I'll talk to you later. Bye.